My name is Georgette Lightbody Lynch. I was born February 2nd, 1943, Groundhog's Day, in Washington, D.C., at Sibley Hospital. And I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is also known as the District of Columbia. And we moved to Bethesda, Maryland when I was a teenager. My father was born in Connecticut, New Haven, I think, and then my mother was born in Washington, D.C. She was the youngest of 6 children. My mother and father, they met when my father went to Georgetown University. My mother's family had a restaurant in Georgetown called Tea Hands, and that's where they met. And the restaurant was there until the 60s when my grandfather died. His sons took it over, and one of my aunts worked there. Anyone's been to Georgetown, it's located where the 1789 restaurant is in Georgetown. My mother's parents, George and Tamam Tehan, came to the United States 3 different times, and every time they took the voyage across the ocean, they had another child, and they had a total of 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys. And the name Tamam was given to 2 of my cousins and also to my daughter, because it was a beautiful name, and I always said if I ever had a daughter, I wanted to name her Tamam. And I think in Arabic it means perfect, and she is perfect in my eyes. My grandfather, George, who I never met any of my grandparents, they all died before I was born, he would push a fruit cart from Georgetown down to the capital and sell fruit. And he did that for many years until he was able to open a restaurant in Georgetown. My father's mother, Rose, came over here to the United States, and she sold apples, and the policeman used to come up and pinch her cheeks and say, "Pretty Rose," and that's how she got her American name, Rose, and that's my middle name. And she sold apples, she parked cars at the arena for the hockey games, and she eventually had enough money to open her restaurant in Mystic, Connecticut. And she was married before, so my father has a half-brother, George O'Keefe. She raised enough money to bring all her siblings to the United States. My father's name was Constantine Bilibassis. And when he came through Ellis Island, at that time they were changing a lot of the foreign names, and they changed it to Bass. They take the 2 first initials and the last 2, and his name is Bass. And I have no immediate relatives other than my brother and his family with the last name Bass. My father was a lot of fun, probably more fun than mother. And I remember when we were sick, we would lay on the couch and watch TV, and my dad would come home, and first I was excited for him to come home from work because he would always come and hug me, and he used to call me his sunshine, as my son calls his child, Sunshine. And my mother was a homebody. She stayed home and took care of the household, never learned to drive a car, but she was very active in the PTA, and as a matter of fact, she was the chairwoman for the March of Dimes for the Washington, D.C. area. And she was given a bracelet that has a lantern on it, which used to be the icon for the March of Dimes, and I do have that charm bracelet with it on. Well, my mother was youngest of 6 children, and so Christmas Day, her brothers would come over to visit their young sister. Then we would travel during the week to visit all of them in their homes. Christmas was always fun because we had a tradition that the youngest person opened their presents first, and then you have to sit and watch, and then it goes down the line, it goes up the line to the older person. And I tried to do that with my children, but it didn't quite work. And my father worked at the Library of Congress. We would love to go visit him because it was such a grand building inside and wander around, but that's where he worked until he passed away. My father purchased a TV for the Joe Louis fight, and that was in the late 40s, or no, it's probably the 50s. Anyway, he set the TV outside, and all our neighbors came over and watched the fight, but it was a little small TV. We always had a lot of activity. Our friends loved to come to our house, and my mother would make homemade pizza, and we'd go down in the rec room, or she would make taffy or peanut brittle, but we had fun. We had fun. It was a loving, fun household. Well, being of Arabic descent, we ate Arabic food probably 5 nights a week, and then she would call American food, and we would have meatloaf, and she loved to make Boston cream pie, and I used to help her prepare the meals. On the weekends, we would clean a leg of lamb and chop it, the meat, or grind it, and she would freeze it and would have it for the week for the meals. For it's cabbage leaves or grape leaves or whatever was on the menu. And we used to help roll grape leaves, and for a family of 6, we would roll probably 100 grape leaves. But cabbage leaves were my favorite. My older brother, Gus, unfortunately died from COVID. last January, and he was married when we were all still young, so I didn't have a big relationship with him like I do with my younger brother Richard, who is a year younger than I am, and we talk on the phone almost every day. And we used to double date in high school, and he has a special place in my heart. And then my youngest one is the sister, Nancy, and she's lives here in Winter Park and has a family that she spends a lot of time with, and that's the four of us. I grew up in the 50s in Washington, D.C. Our playground was the Capitol, the Monument Grounds, Union Station. We also liked to hang out on the street corners at night, particularly in the summertime, and catch fireflies. We used to take the trolley car to Glen Echo Amusement Park. They had wonderful rides, or you could go swimming, or they often had dances on the weekends, and we would go there. Took dance lessons. I can remember my mother holding my hand and walking down 2 or 3 blocks to the dance studio. I remember it as being a giant room, and the mothers would sit around the wall watching the kids dance, but it was probably very small. That was a dream of mine, to be a dancer and go to Broadway, and I never got there, but that's something I always wanted to do. We used to go down the Chesapeake Bay area, and my parents would rent a beach house for 2 or 3 weeks, and we would go crabbing, which was a fun thing my family always did, and we would have crab feasts, and we would even do that when we weren't at the beach. We would have crab feasts in our front yard, and so that was a lot of fun. In D.C., my parents owned 2 homes. One that we lived in, the other was a tourist home. You might have called that a motel today, but they rented out rooms. My brother and I had the chore of cleaning the rooms at night, and we would come home from school and have to go next door, and I can still remember the smell of stale cigarettes and aftershave lotion. We moved from D.C. to Bethesda, Maryland my summer before my junior year of high school. And I went to Walter Johnson High School. He's named after a famous baseball player. And it was sort of out in country. Nowadays it's not, but it was near a lot of farms. And one day we looked out the window and there were all these cows around the school. So all the kids ran outside. They went crazy. I graduated at age 17, 1960. And I still see some of my friends, stay in touch with them. There's a group that live in the state of Florida, and we were getting together about every 2 years. Hopefully we'll have something in the near future. And that's where I got my nickname Peanuts, because I was tiny, and all of my friends were, taller than me, and they still call me that. When we have a little reunion, they call me Peanuts. My mother died, both my parents died from causes that probably would not have happened today. My dad was complications after surgery at age 54, 56, and my mother died from a brain aneurysm. And they were loving parents. My daughter and son, Randy and Tammy. And I remember the day Randy was born. My water broke, went to the hospital, and he was born right away. And when Randy was born, his father was a resident. When you go through the residency program, there are 2 different people in each stage of the residency, 3rd year, 2nd year, 1st year. And his running mate was Bob Lease, so they went through the residency program together. When I went into labor, they could not find the anesthesiologist, and it just so happens that he happened to be on call. Randy was born in Richmond, and Tammy was born in Bethesda, Suburban Hospital. I had what they call Braxton Hicks for about a week, not realizing they were labor pains. And I was not feeling well, and I asked Phil if he could stay home from work. And we went to the doctors, and I came out and I said, the doctor said, she's coming, go to the hospital right now. So we did, and she was born an hour later. But she came so quickly, it was like it never happened. It was one of those things, is it really true? But it was Randy's birthday. My son and daughter were born the same day, 2 years apart. And so my mother, we dropped Randy off at Mom's because she lived around the corner from Suburban Hospital. And she made him a birthday cake out of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Growing up, when they were younger, we'd have their parties together, but when they got to that age that they didn't want to, we didn't. But yeah, Randy and Tammy were born September 16th, on the same day, 2 years apart. I never thought I'd have a daughter, because there were no boys to carry on the Lightbody name, so when she was born, I was so thrilled. And I'm thrilled with my son, too. I'm very fortunate to have one of each. They're loving children. They stay in touch, and what more can a mother say? She loves her kids with all her heart and soul. I said to Randy one time, I said, Randy, you know how much you love your children? That's how much I love you. We always had an extra child or 2 at our house. Randy's bedroom was upstairs, and it was a great big room, and very often there'd be 4 or 5 boys up there and 4 or 5 girls up there just hanging out, I hope. Randy went to Rollins. He was going to go into pre-dental like his father, and he couldn't get the courses he wanted at UCF, so he ended up going to Rollins. And he stayed in the area, and he lived at home because he had met Mary by that time, and he wasn't going to go away to school. And he graduated from Rollins, so we're very proud of him. Randy met Mary at a high school party. He had already graduated from high school. They've been together, I think they've been married 35 years. I used to go to the Winter Park Mall on Friday nights. I would visit Mary in the shoe store. I would visit Tammy at Dillard's, and I would visit Randy in the used to work at the men's store. And my daughter-in-law is a special gal. And she's moved all over the countryside with my son. About every 3 years, he would get a new job, just going up the corporate ladder. And they moved, I don't know how many times, and she'd have to set up households, and she would have to find new doctors for all the kids in the family, and Randy's been very successful. I'm sure he does owe a lot of that to Mary. And Tammy went to FSU, and she wanted to go to a school that had a good sporting program because she's a great sports person. She loves football and all those things, and also something that looked like up north. And FSU has trees and rolling hills and all of that. And she was a Tri-Delt, and when she finished college, she was vice president of the Tri-Delt sorority. And those girls have been so close. They're still close to this day. And her high school friends too. She stays connected. Whenever she comes home, she always makes sure she sees everyone. And every year she always has a big party here at our home. Her high school friends and her college friends. And it's so interesting. All her friends, of course, have children. And for a while they'd bring the children. They were all young, and now they're all in college themselves. But they've stayed. And when Tammy had her bar mitzvahs for her boys, many of her friends came up for that too. So they've just all stayed well connected, as she does for them too. Tammy and Mike have just celebrated their 32nd. Tammy and Mike met in college, and they fell in love, but at the senior year they broke up, and there was the religious aspect of it. But they kept communication open, and they did get back together again. Michael's family, Susan and Doug, and Phil and I agreed to support them 100%, and they had a rabbi and a minister will marry them. Tammy and Mike, since Tammy's been married, she's come home every year with her family for Christmas. Her husband is Jewish, and they made the agreement to raise the boys Jewish, but they celebrate both Hanukkah and Christmas. And like this year, Hanukkah was during the same time as Christmas, so we do Hanukkah candles and we have Christmas. So it's been a wonderful relationship. Tammy and Mike live in Alpharetta, Georgia. They moved there maybe 12 years ago. Before she went back to work, I would go up there often to Tammy's, and we would do projects around the house, and we had a wonderful time. And now that she's been working many years, I don't go up as much as I did. But she's real special to me, and I always think of her as my best friend because I can tell her anything, and I have over the years. Good things and bad things, but she's pretty special. And she has a wonderful husband, Michael, who's a great guy, great guy. Yeah, I think I raised wonderful, I should say, Phil and I raised wonderful children. They're great kids, and I'm very proud of them. Well, I used to go to dance club, and I would watch this man come into the dance club, and he would come in, dance a few dances, and he would leave. And I always was kind of attracted to the twinkle in his eyes and his smile. And many Sunday nights I'd watch him come in, and he'd dance and he would leave. And this one Sunday night, he was standing in front of me they had like a bar type thing in front of the dance floor. And I went up to him, and he said, "You're supposed to be cordial to people there, and particularly if it's a new person joining the club." And I went up and introduced myself, and I said, "I'm Georgette." And he says, "I'm Bill." That was the start of our relationship. We've been together 32 years and married almost 17. Bill was very religious, very involved in the church, and he was having a meeting with our Father Walsh. And Father Walsh would see us at church and say, "How are the Lynches?" Or he'd been to our home several times for dinner. Bill says, "I need to tell you something else. Georgette and I are not married." And he looked at him and he said, "You know you need to make that right." And that started our journey to get married, and we had planned a wedding, and then Bill came down with vocal cord cancer, and we had to postpone it, but we were married, eventually got married, and living happily ever after. And he has 7 children, 5 daughters and 2 sons, and when I tell people that I do love them, I didn't give birth to them, but they treat me like I am very special, and always have, and I have a good relationship with every one of them. And I have 5 grandsons. My daughter has 2. My son has 3. The oldest is 33, and he's a meteorologist. And when he was a little boy, he loved weather, and he would write weather reports for his parents and sit on the kitchen table every morning. He ended up going to the University of Oklahoma and becoming a meteorologist. And I think today he still writes weather reports for his family. And one time, Randy and his youngest son, James, went out to visit Daniel, and they went chasing tornadoes. And Randy came and said that he was so happy to get back to the hotel, he was really scared. But Daniel loves it and always has. And then the second child is Spider, and he's very adventurous. And now he's living in New Zealand with his significant other, Vanessa. And then the youngest is James, and he's another one who knew what he wanted to do. He always wanted to be a pilot, and he is now flying for Hawaiian Airlines, and we're very proud of him. At age 16, he got his driver's license and his pilot's license the same year, and he's 27. Well, I'm a fearful flyer, and it's so interesting. With James, a pilot, sometimes I look up and I say, holy shit, James is flying one of those things. It scares me. Tammy has 2 boys. Matthew is the oldest, and Stephen is the youngest. They are 28 and 26. After Hurricane Andrew, Bill went down to settle claims for people that homes had been damaged. So I went with him. I worked in the office for a while. Then Tammy got pregnant. She was living in Plantation, Florida, and we were down in Miami. So she went into early labor and was on bed rest, so I went and took care of her. I took care of Matthew for the first 9 months of his life. Bill was working in Miami. He'd bring me up to Plantation on Sunday night, and then I would take care of Matthew all day while Tammy was working, and then he would pick me up on Friday night, and we'd go down and spend the weekend together. He was my baby, and I'm a bridge player, and I joined the Newcomers Club, and I met some women that played bridge, and they would come over to the house, to Tammy's apartment. We'd put Matthew in a high chair, and we'd play bridge. And so he has a special place, as do all my grandchildren, but, I would take him, and people would say, is that your child? No. But we had a good time. And then there's Stephen, the redhead. Whenever we would go out with him when he was little, people would say, where did you get that hair color? I want that hair color because his hair is just beautiful. And his father has red hair, and my ex-husband had red hair, so I was always hoping to have a redheaded child, but I had a redheaded grandchild. And Bill has a redheaded daughter, a granddaughter, Stella. So we have redheads on both sides. Excuse me, they're not redheads anymore, they're called ginger. My step-grandchildren, I have 10 of those. Heather, Bill's oldest daughter, has special needs, and she's just a beautiful girl. And she is 36. And there's Alex, and Tatiana, his daughter Amy, adopted. They are both from the Ukraine, and they are siblings. And they are now 28 and 21. Anne has 2 girls. One is in senior at high school, and the other is a second year at FSU. His son Joe has 3 boys, Joey, Jimmy, and Jacob, and they call themselves the 5 J's because the mother and father are Joey and Jamie. Then his son Michael has 2 boys, twin boys, and Liam and John. And then he has 2 single daughters, Cindy and Laura. And Cindy's an emergency room nurse, and Laura works out of her house. Bill surprised me. I think it was my 70th birthday, and invited a lot of my friends to come, and I remember they were scattered around the house. And his family, the kids had activities, and so they didn't come all at one time, but every time one came, they gave me a great big hug, and oh, Gigi, they come and, oh, I love you, Gigi, I love you, Gigi. And one of my girlfriends said, you're right, they really do love you. But I know in my heart where I stand with them. My stepchildren, I love them dearly, and they've been so good to me. And so I have a big family, and I'm very happy. I'm a fearful flyer, which I mentioned before. We did go to Europe, but my Europe and my time was with my family. That's what I enjoy most of anything. My older brother passed away, and that's a sad story. What happened the following 7 months later, his wife, who had been ill and bedridden, she died on my brother's birthday. At the same time, he had died in January. Then I'm the next child, and then my brother Richard, who, as I said earlier, I'm very close to, and he has one daughter, Stephanie, and Her husband's a preacher, and they live in Lynchburg, and they have a grandson that just had their second baby, Mia, and they have a little boy, Rhett. My sister Nancy lives down the street from me, and she has 2 children and 5 grandchildren, and she spends a lot of time with them. She's very fortunate to have all her family so close by. Her children are Jeremy and Tiffany. They're great kids. All of my siblings have great, wonderful children. Now I want to talk about another person that's here in this room, my sister-in-law, Mickey. She is a godsend to our family. When my mother was ill, she took such good care of her. And I could never thank her enough for that. Because I didn't live there the whole time, so she was really a real blessing to our family. When I was first married to Phil Lightbody, we purchased a poodle, and his name was Dominic. And Phil was in residency program at the Richmond, Virginia. And Dominic just knew instinctively what time he would be home. And it was a 2-story townhouse. And Dominic would go sit on the steps waiting to hear his car come in. It's amazing. And after that, we've had, I've had a lot of animals. I think we had a total of about 9 dogs. Dominic, then we had Danielle, then we had Kelly, an Irish setter. And one night, Randy came home from a weekend event, and Kelly was very, very sick. And apparently he'd gotten into something poisonous. Or she was a she. So he woke his father up, and they took her to the kennel, and she had to be put down. When they came back from putting her down, Randy took care of getting rid of her things in the house so I would not be more upset. He got rid of her water bowl, her collars, and leashes and things. We had Hershey, another poodle. Then we adopted Daisy. She was a medium-sized poodle. She was white, and she was 3-legged and blind. But she could jump up on the couch. She was just a wonderful dog. We just loved her a lot, and she and Hershey got along real well. Then I was trying to sell my house, and it was on Lake Sioux in Sevilla in Winter Park. And at one point, I got a call that someone was coming to see the house, and I knew I'd got to clean up and get the dogs outside. So I took the dogs and I threw them out in the backyard, which is a gigantic backyard. We also had 182 feet on Lake Sioux. So I heard Hershey barking like crazy. I'm thinking, what's going on? And I look out the window, and there's Daisy, dead as a doornail, on the deck. What am I going to do? I have these people coming to look at my house. So I went and got a sheet, and I covered her. And when they walked when they walked outside on the deck, I said, excuse me, you're going to have to step over my dead dog. I can laugh about it now, but at the time I could not. They didn't buy the house, by the way. I went through a stage where I was very ill for 3 months. I didn't leave my house. I got down to 90 pounds. I didn't know if I was going to get to my daughter's graduation. They could never find out what was wrong with me, but I couldn't leave. And I had a store in Park Avenue. I wouldn't even go to that. And ran a fever for 3 months. But anyway, Randy and Mary, during that time frame, brought home a beautiful Persian gray kitten. Her name was Roxanne. And she spent most of her time in the bed with me across my neck. She was really sweet. Bill and I purchased Mojo and Monty, and they were with us for 12 years and 13 years. They both died during the pandemic. So we waited about 6 months before we purchased another dog, and then we purchased Rowdy, who is a year and a half. And sometimes I think we made a big mistake because he's always underfoot, but we've gotten into the habit of saying, he's behind you, he's in front of you, he's beside you, so we love him a lot. I'm very blessed in so many ways, and I'm thankful to God. When we lived in Washington, D.C., we went to a church called 9th Street Christian Church, and how old were we there, Richard? About 9, 10 years old. And I decided then I wanted to be a minister. That didn't last very long, but I was very serious. And two other things I really wanted to do was, like I said, I wanted to go to Broadway. My father I graduated from high school at 17, and he wouldn't let me go. And I probably wouldn't have done much because I don't carry a tune, so I would not have been able to sing. And then the other thing, and I don't think many people know this, I would probably never have been able to do it, to be a medical researcher, to help find a cure for cancer and heart disease and things like that. I had my appendix out in January of 1960, and in February I had my 17th birthday, and I graduated from high school in June, so I was just 4 months into being 17. I went to work at the National Institutes of Health, or known as NIH, which is 10 minutes from my parents' home. And my first job was working in the social service department in the clinical center, which was the main hospital. And then after working there for a couple of years, I was the secretary to the assistant director of the National Cancer Institute. And then I met Phil, and we got married, and we moved to Richmond where he did his residency program. And we were there 3 years, and then came back to Rockville. He worked at the NIH for a while, and then we moved to Florida when he went into private practice. My mother passed away in '83, and I inherited a little bit of money, and I'd always wanted to have a little boutique on Park Avenue. So I used that and opened a little shop on Park Avenue, and was in Hidden Gardens. Of those that have been around Winter Park a long time know where the Hidden Garden was. And I only carried hats and accessories, jewelry and handbags. And then I had an opportunity to move out onto the avenue, which I did, and I had that for probably another 5 years or so, and I really enjoyed that. And went to market one time, and vendors were all talking about the economy and how things had slowed down, and I thought I had an offer to sell my lease, and I thought I probably should do that and get it out while I could, and I did. But I went to work every day, and I enjoyed it. Didn't make a whole lot of money, but I did enjoy it. I would work, come home, get ready for Christmas Eve, have family over and everything, and we used to have Santa Claus come, and so that was fun. Loved to dance. Bill and I used to belong to a dance club, and that's where we met. It's called Shagging, and it's a dance they did in the Carolinas in the 50s, and it's a very active club. We don't dance much anymore, but we love the music. It's rhythm and blues music, and it's a popular dance in the Carolinas. They have big events, and it's called Dancing on the Strand, and they call the beach the Strands. I became a happy hoofer. There's a tap dance troupe in Castleberry, and you have to be 50 years or older. And so I joined, and I would go to the practices, and they advanced me to the touring troupe. We would go to nursing homes and things, and I really liked that. But my feet were killing me because we practiced so much. And Bill and I were doing dancing at the dance club, and so I had to give one of them up, and of course I gave up the tap dancing. When we first moved here, I became a pink lady, and well, you volunteer your hours at the Winter Park. I was at the Winter Park Hospital, and then it was a very small community hospital, and it's grown by leaps and bounds over the years. But you would go around the patient's room and offer them magazines. I worked often in the soda shop, and gift shop. Yeah. I was president of the dental auxiliary here in Central Florida. I was a brownie leader, and one year I was the chairman for the Girl Scout cookies. And so one day this semi-truck drives in my driveway and unloads $55,000 worth of Girl Scout cookies in my garage. They went from floor to ceiling. And I just prayed we didn't have a fire or something. But they were all gone within 3 days because we were the distribution point, so all the troops came to pick them up. I was in Corps de Corps. I was in the John Young Guild. I also was in the Junior League and did lots of volunteering there. And then I was chairman of the Junior League's bargain box one year. Well, my hobby is playing bridge, and I loved it so much that I became a bridge director. And I have 2 games on Mondays and Thursdays, and then I play once or twice a week. It keeps me busy, and I do make a little extra pocket money, which I like to have. And I've made some wonderful friends, so it keeps me busy. My friend was killed in a Swiss airplane crash over Nova Scotia, and I wanted to do something in her honor. She just learned to play bridge, and she really loved the game, so I started a bridge tournament in her honor. And before they died, they donated money to the school down by the Tangerine Bowl for scholarships. They had read an article where the principal there had started a scholarship program, and these students had to keep their grades at a certain level to be eligible for this, and then they were awarded a scholarship when they went on to middle school. So we did that for 21 years, just playing bridge, and we've raised over $100,000. And the pandemic hit, and we're not going to start again, but for those years it was wonderful. We had a big brunch at Interlochen, and the girls got to play bridge, and Polly Hopcraft, the lady that died with her husband, loved the game, and we all made wonderful friends playing bridge, and I'm working in the Bridge Center now, so it's been a part of my life for a long time. I've always been religious, not overboard, I don't think. And when I married my first husband, we were married in the Greek Orthodox Church. But I agreed to go to the Methodist church with him and raised our children in the Methodist church. And then when I married my second husband, and I was baptized Orthodox, I said to Bill, we always went to church every Sunday because Bill's very religious. And one day I said to Bill, what's going to happen when I die? Where am I going to be buried? Because I didn't have a real connection, but I had enjoyed going to church with him. So I started the RCIA program and became a Catholic about 16 years ago. Bill and I have a funny story. If he goes before I do, I said, how am I going to know if you're in heaven? Can I hear it, Bill? How do you make that sound? So he has no vocal cord, so we're out shopping or whatever, I'll hear this whistle, and I know it's him. So if he goes before I do, he's going to let me know, but I know he's going to go to heaven. And I pray every night, pray for my children and my grandchildren, and our prayers were answered when my son Randy had COVID a year ago, August, and my daughter-in-law told me that people were praying all over the world as my friends were praying, and he is doing great. And we're so grateful, and I thank God every night for that. When I became a Catholic, I decided to listen to the 2 Catholic channels on Sirius Radio so I could continue to learn about the religion, and I still am learning. So I used to listen to 50s music all the time, so I don't listen to it anymore. I just listen to the Sirius Radio. The only time I put on other music is Christmas time. I listen to Christmas carols. But I love music. At our wedding, we had "Come Away with Me" by Norah Jones. That's a special song to us. I always pick up strays. I'll never forget it. It was at grocery shopping around Christmas, and it was Matthew's first Christmas. And this young guy was checking me out, and we got to talking, and he was by himself. He had just moved to Orlando, knew no one. So I invited him to come over Christmas Eve. Get back to the house, and Tammy says, "What have you done? He's a stranger. You're not going to have this stranger come around my baby. You don't know anything about him." So that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, was I bought him a present, and Bill took me over to where he was living in this little motel off of 1792. And it was really hard for me to knock on the door, and I told a little white lie that we all had the flu, and he was uninvited. So I just try to be kind to people and do for others. The year 1952, I was chosen out of all the Girl Scouts in the District of Columbia to present Bess Truman with a basket, a reed basket that our troop had made. So that was a real honor. And then Betty Ford had breast cancer awareness after she had the mastectomy, and she did a program here all over the United States, and I helped distribute information. But anyway, I have a picture signed from her saying, "Thank you, Georgette." Being with my kids, having them hang out at the house, I just love having y'all there. We've done that a time or two, toilet paper homes. And I remember one time when Randy was maybe in the 3rd grade or 4th grade, and he had to write a paper about his mother. And he said that I sit at the kitchen table, smoke cigarettes, and drink tab. Do you remember that?
You did.
I did. I know I did. Tammy, her name to ma'am is also special. And her dad, when he got mad at her, he'd say, "To ma'am?" And particularly when he was getting ready to put soap in her mouth, she would run and hide. And he's been known to paddle a time or two, and Randy would put magazines in his pants so he wouldn't feel the paddle. He's going to kill me for saying that. And then Randy would tape the spray gun and the kitchen sink together, and I'd turn my water on in the morning, and it would splash me in the face. He would put these poppet things in my cigarettes. And Mary, our daughter-in-law, lived with us for a while before they were married, and she and I would go to jazzercise, and I'd get in the car and I'd light up a cigarette. And I've told this story to many people. She looks at me and she says, "Are you crazy? We just finished exercising and you're lighting a cigarette." So about 35 years ago, I decided I was going to try and quit. And so I set a date. It was Mandy Hand's wedding. By the time, it was 3 months. By the time Mandy Hand's wedding, I had to quit that day. So that's been, probably 38 years ago. And I still miss it to this day. There are times when I would like to have one. Randy and Tammy's weddings, I love those. They were beautiful. My marriage to my second husband. had a lot of wonderful times. It's hard to pick one. I'm a fearful flyer, and I've taken some classes, and I got over it for a short period of time, and I had taken the classes right before 9/11, so I put my flying on hold again. We were going back to Maryland for one of my high school reunions, and we decided to fly. And we get to the airport, and I wore a hat, and I just thought, try to dress up a little bit, maybe it'd make my life a little easier on the airplane. And sitting at the waiting, my leg is going like this. He looks at me and he said, "It's time to get on the plane, and I love you." And I said, "I don't give a shit that you love me." And then Bill and I had a chance to go to Geneva, Switzerland, to my dear friend's granddaughter's wedding. And we decided we'd give it a try, and Randy upgraded us so that we were in first class to make it a little easier for me. And that was a wonderful trip. Had a great time. We went to Paris and Florence, and we took that trip to Europe for the wedding, and then we went to Europe on our honeymoon. We went to Rome, spent several days there, and what's interesting about that trip, my dear friend Linda Kaufman, who's deceased now, said, "Don't eat at the big restaurants. Go to eat all the little restaurants in the basements of these other buildings." And we did, and it was interesting because each one had a different take on. I would eat pizza, and Bill loves lasagna, and each one had a little, treated them differently. And then we got on the ship and took a cruise of the Greek islands, and the first one we went to, I think it was Mykonos. You know, you take a little dinghy boat over to the island, and when we got there, all these Greek icons, and this incense were going into this little building. I walked in, and I started crying because it was my heritage. My father was Greek, and I'm going to cry again. Anyway, you know, and that was an emotional time for me, and I still remember it when I think about it. We used to go to New York, absolutely. Loved to go to New York, loved to see the Rockettes. My favorite place on one of our trips was Venice. Loved Venice. We took the train from Florence, I guess, to Venice, and we get off the train, and you have to walk down some steps, and it's just like you see in the movies. It was so exciting. We loved that. I loved Venice. I'd leave Bill having a drink, and I'd walk all around the streets and everything. When we were down in Miami, my sister would drive by our house and keep an eye out on it. And one night she drove by and saw all the lights on. And she knocked on the door, and Randy opens the door, and he and his friends were coming and playing poker in my house while I was gone, and smoking cigars. What do you have to say about that, Randy?
I don't remember it.
You don't? So, you know, I have a lot of wonderful memories. It's time goes by too quickly for all of us, and you don't know what's going to happen the next day or the next week or the next month, and just be grateful for all that you do have and love one another. My legacy? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's for them to tell. Really. I mean, that I was kind and loving and was a great mom and did for my children as much as I could. I tried to be kind to my mother. She had some health issues, and all the siblings took care of her, and I would bring her down from Maryland to stay with us for a while to give the family up there a break. Of course, raising my family and making my home an open home for them and their friends to be at our house anytime they wanted to be. I always try to keep the kids involved and be busy doing their own thing and being able to be comfortable in their own home. The best parts, I can do pretty much what I want to do. The worst thing, having aches and pains and can't do what I used to do when I was younger. And I could go 24/7, but I can't do that anymore. I'm very content. At 80 years old, oh, now I'm going to cry. I hadn't cried before. I can't believe I'm 80 years old. That just blows my mind. 80 years old, when you think about that. That was ancient years ago. And now it's what they say, the new 60s or 70s, whatever. But I look around my friends, they're all the same age, and they look fabulous. But what we have available to us today that our parents didn't have, makeup, hair color, knowledge. I mean, knowledge about how to stay healthy and eat healthy and exercise that, you know, our parents didn't have. The bottom line is, I'm happy. I mean, I can't ask for anything more. Sure, maybe have another couple $1 million or whatever, but that bottom line is, I'm very content. Very content. Be loving and kind, but also look forward to what's coming. Think of me often. I love you all.